Today, we're going to talk about satisfaction and pleasure. This is a workshop that I've given one other time at this year's Bonsko Nomad Fest. And it was a really great workshop there. It really spurred a lot of discussion. So I want to encourage all of you to share, to ask questions. You know, if you don't feel like unmuting yourself, you can always put questions or comments in the chat as well. But I really want this to be fairly interactive. And I want everyone to walk away from this feeling like they have a greater understanding of the difference between satisfaction and pleasure, and how, looking at the year ahead, you can bring these into better balance in your life. Let me figure out how to tab through my slides here. So you all know me pretty well. I think you all kind of know my story, but I'll just briefly, give you some background on myself. In 2014 through 2017, I was living in Chicago. I was working in advertising there, and I was overworked, underpaid, and underappreciated. After about 3.5 years of that, I was really, really burnt out. And so I moved back to my home state of Colorado, where I found a greater work-life balance. So I started working for a marketing agency part-time, and that eventually turned into a freelancing career, something that I never thought would be possible for me. And for the first time in my life, I was working more and making better money, but feeling like I had a greater work-life balance than I ever had before. I was just feeling like I had a lot of autonomy and really cured that burnout that I'd struggled with for so many years. In December of 2018, I joined Remote Year and left to travel the world and never looked back. I've been traveling ever since. And that really gave me an idea of how I could restructure my life outside of the norms, that society had given me to work within. And so as I started living this alternative lifestyle, which so many of you here live yourselves, I started to question other things in my life, including my career. And in June of 2020, I decided to become a coach, a life coach. And so I've now been working for almost 2 years as a life and well-being coach. And what I'm really specializing in is helping others to find the joy and well-being that I've found and build a life that they love, a life that you don't need a vacation from. So to some people, that might mean traveling. To others, it might just mean finding that great balance between pleasure and satisfaction. But whatever that means for you, I'm here for it. And I look forward to helping you find that for yourselves. All right. We have at least one newcomer. Hi, Carlos. Welcome. Feel free to update your name with your location if you'd like. As you can see, everyone else has done. Carlos is joining us from San Cristobal de las Casas, Mexico.
Hola, Laurel. How are you? How are you, everybody? Yes, I am in San Cristobal Casas. Great to be here.
Great to have you. All right, we're just diving into the good stuff, so you came just in time.
Awesome. Yeah, I was having issues finding the, just getting in. Figure it out.
I'm glad you made it. Okay, so let's dive into pleasure versus satisfaction. First and foremost, does anyone want to share their thoughts on what are the differences between pleasure and satisfaction? Anyone?
I feel like,
Go ahead.
I feel like pleasure might be more short-lived than satisfaction.
Okay. Carlos, anything to add?
Yeah, I think same idea and concept. The pleasure is more like short reward, and satisfaction is more for the long term. Like working towards something for the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to give you some hints with this slide for sure. But yes, if we really compare the two side by side, pleasure is shortly lived, whereas satisfaction tends to stay with us for longer. Pleasure mostly comes from outside sources, so from material things, from other people, from the world around us. Pleasure is never fully satiable because it's so short-lived. We're always left wanting more, right? And that's what can so easily lead to addiction. I think all of us have some addictions, whether we recognize it or not. It could be an addiction to technology or to sugar or, something more serious like drugs or alcohol. But this comes from, needing those short hits of dopamine that help make us feel so good. So talking a bit about satisfaction, in contrast, satisfaction is longer lasting. It comes from within. So rather than coming from outside exterior sources, it's this feeling that we hold within us. Satisfaction comes from working towards and achieving a goal. It comes from serving others, from giving love and doing things out of the goodness of our heart. And it also comes from living according to our values, which is so important. And we'll really dive into that in a bit. Does anyone have any questions about the difference between these two or what might qualify as either of these?
No, thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, those are good definitions.
Great. All right, let's move on then. Okay, so here we come to an activity. You can each do this on your own. But I want you to go through this list and identify whether each of these activities qualifies more as pleasure or satisfaction. Now, I understand that some of them, it might depend a bit on context, but just at a glance, surface level, see how you would identify each of these. I'll give you all a few minutes to do that. Okay, has everyone had time to get through at least most of these?
Yes.
Okay.
I struggle a
So
little bit.
what's that?
Yeah, like I found out like a few of them were like, is this pleasure or satisfaction?
Which ones tripped you up?
Like I think um like falling in love
Mhm.
and hosting for a benefit charity, volunteering no well that's satisfaction. Let me see the other one.
Visiting your parents. Is that either?
Yeah,
It really
that
depends
one
on
is
your relationship with your parents. Falling in love is an interesting one, right? Because there are elements of that that are both, right? It's very highly pleasurable. But you're also potentially building a really beautiful connection and relationship with someone, which can be deeply satisfying.
Mm,
So I would say, it's probably more satisfaction in the long term, but there's also a lot of pleasure involved there.
yeah.
Any others that, I don't know, made anyone think or that you want to share, that you want clarity on?
Yeah, actually when you're saying like falling in love, I yeah, it's kind of between the both, right? Like it's something that can be satisfactory in the long term and pleasure at the same time. Um I
We lose Carlos. Is everyone else still there?
Yeah, I felt like cooking a meal for friends could also be both,
Right.
or I'm not sure either if I have to choose which one I would pick.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the meal itself might be very pleasurable, right? But perhaps the act of service and spending time with your friends is deeply satisfying.
And I
Right.
think visiting 100 countries is sort of both too, like pleasure along the way, and the Eiffel Tower, because that might be like a goal for somebody.
Yeah. So the question there would be, what is your intention? And how are you going about your travels? Are you so fixated on reaching this goal of visiting 100 countries that you're not really like having these satisfying immersive experiences while you're there? Or is it, are you someone who travels, let's say, just for food, right? Which is more pleasure oriented versus like I travel to connect and meet new people and, get to know a new culture. That would be more on the side of satisfaction. Okay. Any others that anyone wants to discuss? Okay, great. Yeah, so this is kind of a first exercise just to get us thinking about what is the difference between pleasure and satisfaction. And obviously, as we've discussed here, there aren't always clear-cut answers to which is which. But if you're ever unsure about whether something is more pleasurable or satisfying, you can go back to the criteria from, the previous slides and ask yourself, is this longer lasting? Is this staying with me? Does this come from outside or does this come from within? So we'll move on now to another activity. Okay, and this each of you can do for your own lives. I'll give you each 5 minutes to start creating this list, but go ahead and make 2 columns. So one for pleasure and one for satisfaction. And look back on the past year of your life. This should be pretty easy since we're coming up on the end of a calendar year. but list all major activities, events, accomplishments, or milestones that you've, achieved or can remember from the past year, and put them each into one of the two columns. Are they more in the column of pleasure or more the column of satisfaction? Does anyone have any questions about this, or is it clear?
It's clear. That makes sense.
They seem to be having technical issues. Okay, hopefully that gave you all enough time to start making a list. How did this go?
Pretty good.
It's hard to think of things.
Sometimes it's hard for me to tell the difference between if it was more pleasure or satisfaction with some of the things I'm entering.
Do you have an example that you wouldn't mind sharing?
I had a couple, but one was, I don't know if this is a good one, but quitting my business. It was like, it was definitely felt like satisfaction, but it was also pleasurable to not have to deal with all that stress anymore. And then hiking Fuego like we did recently here, that incredible, gorgeous, amazing hike was sometimes pleasurable, but sometimes more like satisfaction, because sometimes it wasn't exactly pleasurable, but it was a really beautiful accomplishment. And like, wow, it's really impressive to see what we can do with our bodies. We can push ourselves so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings up a good point, that anytime that we can combine the two, that's really kind of the jackpot, right? I mean, I think there are things that we can do that are satisfying, but not necessarily pleasurable. An example of that, Jill, I'm sure you'll become very familiar with this soon, is anytime that a mother makes sacrifices for her children. That's not easy and it's not pleasurable, but it's deeply satisfying because, a mother's love leads her to want to do that in certain cases. Anything else that anyone wants to share here? Any questions that come up?
I'll share one that was, I think, for me both. I spent most of ski season in Europe, which was sort of like a long time dream of mine. And so I think it would fit in both of these buckets. In that throughout the season, there was a lot of pleasure in enjoying the slopes, and then a lot of long-term satisfaction having not just check that off the list, but like accomplish that.
Yeah, and I would imagine that you're improving your abilities as a skier as well, right? And so that is the more satisfying element of that too.
Yep.
Okay, great. Let's move on to the next part. Sorry, guys, my controls are getting all wonky here as far as being able to unmute and being able to tab through slides. So just bear with me for a second. Okay. So let's talk a bit about values, because I think, especially when it comes to satisfaction, values are such an important part of understanding what we find satisfying. Many people maybe think that they know what they value, but I'm curious to know, how many people here have actually asked yourself, and let's say in the past 6 months, what are my top core values? I know Amanda has, because she's done this exercise with me more recently.
You can't see me, but I'm raising my hand.
Yeah, so that's something that we'll get into here today. Again, as a way of really thinking about the year ahead and how to make it more satisfying. So values are a person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life, right? And we may have dear friends who share some of our values and have some values that are different from ours. I would argue too that this is extremely important in romantic relationships to have shared values, especially if you're looking to build a life with someone. And oftentimes I think when our relationships diverge, it's because we don't share enough common values. I like this quote from Elvis as well. Values are like fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over everything you do. And so that's really worth thinking about as well. We all go about our lives on a daily basis, and many of us don't give much thought to what our values are or whether we're living according to them. But you might have things in your life that feel like they're not aligned or they're not quite right, or maybe you don't quite enjoy them, but you're not sure why. And I would argue that that's likely because they're not in accordance with your values. Okay. So here's a list of core values. I would invite each of you to take a screenshot of this because we probably won't have enough time today to complete this exercise. Or it might be something that you'll want to revisit, say in 3 months or 6 months or at any given time. I find our values change over time. You know, we often will keep the same values, but their order of priority in our life shifts. And now let's take 10 minutes here. We'll start with that and go through this list and go ahead and let's start by identifying your top 10 values. And then if you have time, go ahead and narrow it down to your top 5 and then your top 3. And then see if you can even get at one core value that is higher in importance than all the rest of these. I would recommend that you don't overthink this. Okay, don't get too in your head about it. Go with your gut. You know, if something here really is pulling you and you can feel it even physically from your heart or your gut or wherever in your body, then I'd say you probably have a pretty you have a pretty strong draw to it. Each of these, you can define them however you want, right? So a value of, let's say, I don't know, openness might mean something different to me than it does to you, but that's okay, right? These are your values. So you can interpret these the way that you want to. Any questions before we dive into this? Okay.
Laurel, as a part of this exercise, is it worth trying to like narrow these down as like, hey, what are your top 10 or top 15 versus sort of like checking through like, yeah, this one has some meaning for me versus this one has less?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'd love for each person here to try to identify their top 10. And then if you have time, try to narrow it down to top 5, top 3, and then see if you can even identify one top value.
Okay, yeah, because I highlighted like 32 is just looking at all of them, like, okay, yeah, this one, this one, this one. So yeah, it would be interesting to sort of go back through and remove or add.
Yeah, and you might even be able to merge some of them. That's kind of where I've landed
Yeah.
sometimes. As I look at my top 32, I'll find that, maybe 3 of them are actually kind of the same thing, and maybe I even give them a different name.
Do you want to share with us your top core values?
I can. Do you want to take maybe 2 more minutes? I'll give you 2 more minutes to kind of, work through this on your own, and then we can do some sharing.
Okay.
So I see Jill shared that this was tough for her because so many of these speak to her. And, I think that's the nuance of this exercise, right? Is we are dynamic beings, and we have many things that we value and treasure and appreciate and that are important to us. And the question is, which are the most important, right? Because so often throughout our life, we're going to face competing values. We will find ourselves in situations where maybe the things that we value are competing with each other. And that's where we feel that stress and strain of trying to make decisions that are best for us or most aligned with our needs and our desires. So in understanding, that perhaps I value, let's say, cooperation and strength, I know that cooperation is actually more important to me and that I value that more highly than strength. So if I find myself in a situation where those 2 values are competing, I know which one is going to win. Does that make sense? So Carlos, you asked me to share my top values. My top 3 values are life, love, and transcendence, which I don't believe is on here, but it's one that I've identified for myself. And it's basically the ongoing desire to grow and to be the best that I can be, and to, try to show up as, I don't want to say a better, but, a brighter version of myself each day. Does anyone else want to share maybe their top 3, if anyone was able to get that far?
Sure. It's Tom here. I'm sitting with Katie. My top 3 values are spirituality, growth, and wealth. And wealth as in like wealth in all aspects of life, not just with money. And same with growth, just to continue to grow. It's such a huge thing for me in my life. And I think I would even say spirituality in that broader sense is my main like top value of which kind of coincides all this stuff for me personally. And like transcendence, what you were saying and all that. But yeah, spirituality, like to continue to grow in all aspects of life. So yeah, that's mine.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
No problem. Do you want to share? No.
Amanda, did you want to share?
Sure, I'll share. I have not narrowed it down beyond the top 5, but I will share those. If that's all right. My top 5 are freedom, connection, growth, experience, and sort of like kindness / compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is super interesting because I did this exercise a little over a year ago. I don't remember when I did it with you this summer, but I did this a little over a year ago. And growth, like the values are very similar, but I know that growth is the only one that continues to be like the same in my mind as the top value. So my values have like shifted a bit, but even though overall they're still quite similar.
Yeah. That's awesome that you can see that, and that you've done this a few times, so you can kind of witness that change beyond just feeling
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to share?
Okay.
Yeah, I think for me, it's a really nice exercise to narrow down the values for myself. And thanks for sharing yours. Actually, it made me realize that it's not on this list that I created, but I think like legacy, like creating something that will stay after I'm gone. And it's kind of similar to what you shared. So yeah, I think it's something I will dive deeper today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. That's a really beautiful one too. Legacy. And that's, that is a deeply satisfying value too, right? To create something of your own that will live past your own life. Okay. All right, let's continue then. As I mentioned, one last chance if anyone wants to screenshot this, just to keep it for yourself. And as we've seen too, this is obviously not an exhaustive list. So you might identify values that aren't on this list. This is just a really good place to start. Okay, so now that we've honed in on those values, how do we take those and our understanding of pleasure and satisfaction and look at the year ahead to make it both more pleasurable and more satisfying? Now, as you did the evaluation of the past year, where we made the 2 columns for pleasure and satisfaction and looked at activities or milestones or whatever, and which ones fit into each, did you find that perhaps you were unbalanced in any ways? Did anyone find that maybe they had more pleasure or more satisfaction?
I felt it was a lot easier to come up with pleasurable memories than truly satisfactory memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, of course, on a regular basis, there are so many little things that qualify as pleasure, right? Like if you were to just list the things that come to mind for pleasure and satisfaction, you're probably going to end up with a longer list for pleasure than for satisfaction, no matter what, because it's like maybe every night you have a phenomenal dinner. So that counts as pleasure. Whereas satisfaction, because it tends to take longer to build, you might have fewer things in your life, but that are like deeply satisfying and creating satisfaction on a daily basis, whether it's like a business that you're building or, your weekly trips to volunteer with a local organization, or I don't know, your interactions with your significant other, whatever it might be. But looking at your current balance of pleasure and satisfaction, as you think about the year ahead, do you want to maybe bring one into greater prevalence in your life? So I would ask you each to start to plan out the next 6 months. Okay. So you can just use this time to even just write down things that you know you want to do, or maybe things that you already have planned for the year ahead. Okay. And as you do this, you can start by just making a laundry list of whatever comes to mind. And let's maybe just look at the next 6 months, right? A year is quite a ways to plan in advance, but look at either the first 3 months or the first 6 months of 2023 and just start to make a list of things that you want or that you anticipate, that you want to prioritize, that you want to do, etc. And then once you've made that list, look at it and ask yourself, are these things that align with my values? Do these qualify more as pleasure or satisfaction, or are they both? And see if that list is balanced. And if it's not, then perhaps your next step would be to figure out how you can create either more satisfaction or more pleasure in your life, or take something that's, say, deeply pleasurable, and how do you make that more satisfying, or vice versa? Something that's deeply satisfying, but maybe not very pleasurable. How can you make that more pleasurable? Okay, so just so we're clear, let's take just 5 minutes now and just start to make a list of everything that you want or anticipate over the next 3 to 6 months. You choose whichever works for you. And then once you've made that list, look at it and see, does this align with my values? And does this feel balanced, or am I lacking in either pleasure or satisfaction? Any questions? Okay. Okay, so hopefully that gave everyone enough time to at least start a list and thinking about what this might look like for you. Anything that anyone wants to share?
Katie wants to share.
I want to share, but I was finishing a bite. Okay, how many of these should I read?
Just share.
Okay, here's my list. Herb's program, which is the hypnotherapy program, the year-long program that starts in January that I'm about to do. So that's will be about learning and growing. Read more spiritual books. Go to more conscious activities. Dance and play. Build strong connections / bonds. Continue to discover my gifts and share them. Love deeply and open-heartedly. More tantra. Earn money. Hike / time in nature. Learn more Spanish.
That's great. So as you look at that list, does it feel pretty balanced to you?
Does it feel what?
Does it feel fairly balanced?
Of between pleasure and satisfaction? It does for me.
Yeah. And do you feel like you're hitting your top values there as well?
I do.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Does anyone else want to share?
Thank you.
You don't have to share just your list of things, but if you had any realizations about where you can bring more pleasure in or more satisfaction in, or maybe where you haven't created that balance as you start to think ahead, but you might be able to. Just curious to hear what everyone's willing to share so we can kind of grow together and help each other through this.
Yeah, I think for me, these exercises are bringing awareness the areas in my life that I need to bring more satisfaction in creating these spaces. So I think it's something I need to, I want to dive deeper to create these spaces for me to have more satisfaction in my life. And yeah, it's really, really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. As you start to come to that realization, do you have any thoughts on where you can create that or how?
Yeah. So one of me on the question, I just start to plan out the next 6 months, how you can cultivate great satisfaction by living in accordance with your values. For me, this is by showing up for myself, for the goals I set for myself, and kind of like a reward in creating spaces every week where I will intentionally unplug from work and allow myself to feel like, yeah, just disconnect either in nature or um, with my partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And your work itself, I would imagine has the potential to be deeply satisfying too. But yeah, maybe there's that pleasure aspect to that as well, right? Like when you have been working hard, then you reward yourself by, taking that time to yourself to rest, to recuperate.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share? Okay. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this session. I hope that everyone feels that they got at least something out of this and they have something to think about as we go into the new year. As you all know, I'm a life and well-being coach. So as a life coach, I can help my clients with pretty much anything that they're working through in their life, personal, professional matters. And as a well-being coach, what I do is I help clients to examine the three aspects of their being. So body, soul, and mind, and figure out where there might be imbalance and how to bring those into greater balance for greater overall well-being. So if you ever feel like you might benefit from any kind of coaching, you know how to reach me. But I'm happy to schedule a free consultation with you and just chat and see if it might be a good fit. Thank you all so much for coming today. I will be posting this at some point. So once I post it to my website, you all will have it there as well, but hopefully you took some screenshots throughout where needed, so you have this information for yourselves. Any final questions or anything anyone wants to add or say?
Thanks for hosting this, Laurel. This was really cool. Tom and I both said we're excited to look at this together, like review our list together of everything. The exercises were really cool and impactful and could really benefit our years.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate this.
Thank you guys. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Laurel.
you.
Take care.